Welcome into a Wednesday morning live edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Nick Whalen back with Brandon Kravitz. Brandon, we got a lot to get to today. As usual, at some point this will devolve into a live listener Q&A. That's kind of become the meat and potatoes of the pod, if you will, Brandon. And we enjoy all the live questions. We'll get to those, over the second half of the podcast. So feel free to, throw those in the chat. We'll hit those. We'll include all the timestamps, on YouTube and in the description, so you can skip around and, kind of get advice on whatever players or teams you need. But Brandon, we had a huge in-season tournament night on Tuesday. I want to get kind of an overall check-in now as we have reached the end of group play. We have the real thing coming at us next week, the semifinals, the finals in Vegas. A lot is still up in the air as far as what the rest of the schedule is going to look like from a fantasy basketball perspective. It's super confusing to go over to the NBA.com or ESPN.com schedule page, and it's just blocks and blocks of TBD. But overall, given what you thought the tournament would be when it was announced back in July or August versus what it's been now at the end of November, has it been a success? Has it been a failure? Has it been somewhere in the middle? Where do you come in?
I think it's been a huge success. Well, we didn't expect anything too much from it. It really was going to come down to, are the fans into it and entertained? Check on that. Are the games good? That was right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. They were good. And then this shouldn't be the most important part, because you shouldn't have to convince millionaires that play basketball for a living to care about the games they play. But do the players care? Do they care about the tournament itself? And I think a lot of them, especially the higher end stars, acted like, I don't even know what this is. I'm confused by it, whatever. But as the tournament has gone along, as group play went along, we saw those guys. Now, all of a sudden, they ratchet up their intensity. Mm-hmm. I thought last night was such a win for the NBA, where you had the Celtics running up the score on the Bulls, and Joe Mazzulla has to go over to Billy Donovan and explain what he's doing. That's something we're going to look back. There might be a 30 for 30 about this one day, and that clip is going to be in it. So in that way, it was a win.
Did the Celtics go too far on that? Because, Billy Donovan, he kind of clarified after. I think he understood. It's not like he didn't know that it comes down to point differential. So I think he got what the Celtics were doing, but he said, look, it was a step too far. You're up 30. You're specifically embarrassing Andre Drummond. He's like, it's one thing if you want to leave your starters in and try to score as much as you can, get some stops, but to go to hack a Drummond in that situation, he felt like was a bridge too far. I mean, do you agree with that, or is it do whatever you got to do to get that differential?
If you're going after a differential, you got to do what you got to do.
I agree. I completely agree.
To points pile up in the NBA, you can never. If that's what you're going after, then that's what you have to do. I do think that as we get through one season of this, and I will disclaimer this is coming from a bitter Magic supporter who was screwed by differential. I don't think that games or advancing in this tournament should be decided by point differential. We have to come up with a different way for exactly that reason. I don't think that the games should devolve into, I'm trying to beat you by 30. I think that is, it's not so much that a team like the Magic, who've been playing phenomenal, get left out of advancing in this tournament. It's more of the issue of what we saw last night in that game, where teams are gunning for a certain number. That's fun in an all-star game. In the regular season, I think it bastardizes the sport a little bit.
Bastardizes. Wow, good word. Yeah, do you think, do we get a college football playoff situation here where, 5 years from now, or even 2 or 3 years from now, this is expanded, because of what you just said, that, the tiebreakers and whatnot are a little convoluted and it doesn't quite seem fair. When you're dealing with such a small sample size, right? A 4-game sample, inevitably you're going to have ties all over the place. And I think that's maybe something that the NBA would want to address, to have a cleaner way to decide other than point differential. I don't know what that solution would be off the top of my head, but obviously expanding the field would get more teams into this. 2-3 years from now, do you think we have 12 finalists instead of 6?
I think I'm going to hold out on definitively answering that question until we see how this next round goes. I don't think that we can look at restructuring the overall format of it until we get an idea of what it looks like when it's completely played out. If you take it too far, does it then eat into too much of the regular season? We're not even sure conclusively that this is a positive. I don't think we need more of it yet. Yeah. I think let's just settle in on what we have in front of us. But one thing, if you wanted to stick with point differential, because throughout all of this, they've been trying to follow this international soccer model of group play where point differential does come into play when you're talking about group staging before you advance to knockout rounds. If you want to do that in the NBA, okay, but at least just limit it to point differential against common opponents. So, right. I mean, I'm only going to use this example because it's the one that I followed the most closely, but would be the Celtics, Nets, and Magic matchups against each other should be the only thing that determines who advances to the next round. What the Celtics do against the Bulls should be completely irrelevant to the situation. What the Bulls do against the Raptors should be irrelevant. So how much did the Magic beat the Celtics by? How much did the Celtics beat the Nets by? I think that if you're going to use point differential, it should be within a common opponent tiebreaker situation, not against everybody. Because, yeah, okay, so you beat the Bulls by 30. What is that?
Right.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I saw some complaining specifically from some Wolves fans on Twitter last night. They're obviously the best team in the Western Conference right now. They did not qualify for the in-season tournament, and their argument was like, look, we got Golden State, we got OKC, we got Sacramento in our group. Like, yeah, you got the Spurs, you can beat up on them, but the Lakers, for example, just lost by almost 40 to the Sixers the other night. They went 4-0 in their group, partially because they got Utah, Portland, and Memphis. So some of it is kind of the luck of the draw.
So if your blowout happens to come in in-season tournament play, then you're screwed. That I just don't. I don't like the way that it's set up in that regard. But I do think I don't want point differential to be involved in it at all. I don't really think that that's the best determining factor for who advances in this thing. But whatever, it's what we have right now, and until we come up with something better. Or maybe play a fifth game where, it's not – I don't know if that would make a huge difference either at the end of the day. You could still end up with ties. But
right. Yeah, I think you need a fairly dramatic jump in sample to avoid that. Last thing I'll say in the in-season tournament, they did kind of the March Madness style. If you were watching the TNT broadcast specifically last night of Bucks Heat, where you had all the score graphics on the top, which was actually pretty confusing because they had 5 different scores. It was all over the place. I think what they need is, a live updating kind of like a table of standings as opposed to the game scores, because you basically need to have a second screen up referencing okay, what is each team's record here? What's on the line? There should be a little graphic, kind of with that updates live, especially last night when it was basically all about point differential. I think that would be more useful than just displaying the raw scores. I think you need kind of a little table for each group. And, obviously if you're watching a game, because there were a bunch of games that started at 7 p.m. my time last night. There were 5 or 6 games going on at once. I mean, you could have a live updating table and teams are kind of moving up and down within their group based on what happened. So, I think overall you're right. This has been a success. I thought players would care way less about it. And, Jimmy Butler sat out last night, probably could have played. That maybe says something about how some players feel about it. But in general, I think there are a few pretty minor tweaks the league could make to just clarify, some of the logistical things regarding the in-season tournament, and that would go a long way toward kind of roping in the casual fans.
I completely agree. I look at this through 2 different lenses. One, as a Magic fan and somebody who works with the team. From that lens, I thought it was really easy to follow. So if you're just following one team in one group, it's not that complicated. But the second lens I look at it through is as an NBA fan. I love the league. And that was hard to follow. It was hard to keep track of everything that was going on. And so to your point, if they're going to do this and they're going to roll this out to their fans, they've got to do a better job explaining. It's not like this. I hate saying that because I feel like sometimes it comes across like, oh, I'm just so confused by how this all works. Yeah. It's not that confusing. It's that there's so much to keep track of with it, and it's new. They should be beating us over the head with how this works, how teams advance, and what matters. I think they could have done a better job.
Yeah, and more informational videos, I guess, voiced by Richard Jefferson. That might be the solution. All right, before we talk LaMelo Ball, we got a message from Underdog Fantasy. It's the #1 platform for NBA best ball and DFS player pickup contest. If you have not tried Underdog yet, new Underdog users receive a first-time deposit bonus up to $100 and a free 6-month subscription to RotoWire. That is invaluable. All you got to do is use the promo code RWNBA. That's RW as in RW McQuarters, RWNBA. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or download the Underdog app today and use that code RWNBA to claim your free RotoWire subscription and deposit bonus. I played a lot on Underdog this past weekend, mostly NFL contests, Brandon, and they do a good job. There's a lot of DFS sites out there, but I think presentation-wise, app-wise, Underdog is one of my favorites. Let's talk some LaMelo. I mean, this is just brutal news for my NFBKC team, which, I don't like to gloat early in the season, but I was in good shape here, Brandon. This was the best team I think I've had in this contest, and I've been doing it for 5 or 6 years now. And I knew what I was signing up for when I started Anthony Davis and LaMelo Ball with my first 2 picks.
I remember you mentioning that. Like, you knew how this was going to end.
The way the board broke down, I kind of had no choice. Like, I either had to play it. I would have kind of taken some like safe choices that I felt like didn't have enough upside. Like that league, I'm trying to win it or like take last. I don't really care. It's not like the RotoWire Stake League where you just got to be in the top half of the standings. Like I want to win this thing. So I figured, why not? Throw caution to the wind, pair LaMelo with Davis. If anything, I thought AD would be the guy that we'd be dealing with an injury, less than 20 games in. But LaMelo will miss, quote, extended time. No structural damage, technically, to his right ankle and foot, which is, I guess, a good thing. But they're calling it a severe ankle sprain. We don't really have a firm timetable. I mean, I'm bracing for, I think, what could be a month plus, right? Especially considering he injured that same area of his body multiple times last season.
Yeah, I was actually at that game where he went down in a heap. He was down for a while. You weren't sure just based on the way that he fell, if it was leg or if he had hit his head on the court. And then when you saw him getting helped off to the locker room, he couldn't put any weight whatsoever on his ankle. And that was the issue that he dealt with last year. So this is now becoming a serial event with LaMelo Ball. And I think is problematic for his future. These Ball children just simply cannot catch a break. Lonzo has been dealing with injuries all the way throughout his career. And it seems like LaMelo, I don't know if it's, hereditary, if it's coincidence or the way that they were brought up. I'm not going to speculate on that because their father's crazy.
I think it was the shoes for Lonzo. That's my personal theory. But, I believe LaMelo's been a Puma guy the last couple of years, right?
Well, this is not a good advertisement for Puma then. I didn't even know Puma was still making basketball shoes, so this is news to me. But this is not good. This is, maybe I don't know how long he's going to be out, but hard to have any confidence that he's not just going to go back out on the injury report again in the future.
Yeah, I mean, last 9 games for LaMelo. He got off to that terrible start shooting the ball, but then, he was one of the best players in all of fantasy for the last few weeks. 32 points, 7 rebounds, almost 9 assists, 1.5 steals. 49, 44, 88 shooting splits over the last couple of weeks before that injury. So obviously devastating for me, devastating for anybody rostering LaMelo. I would like to say we got a representative sample last night of like, all right, what does this rotation look like post LaMelo? And maybe we did. I mean, the Hornets got completely blown off the floor by the New York Knicks, which might be happening quite a bit. So maybe this is what the rotation will actually look like. I thought, Gordon Hayward, I threw him out there in one of my lineups thinking, all right, no LaMelo, maybe some more playmaking for him, some more opportunities. He did have 6 assists. He played 28 minutes, but took 7 shots. That was pretty disappointing last night, although it's a good Knicks defense. Miles Bridges even struggled. He's been fantastic lately. I do think, if one player benefits above all, it's probably Terry Rozier, who did not have a good shooting night last night, but I think his usage will go up. And, Brandon Miller has actually looked pretty decent as well. I mean, he led them with 18 points in 36 minutes last night.
Yeah, I think the most direct bump up would be Terry Rozier because he'll take over as a starting point guard. So, like you said, all of the usage, he'll end up piling up numbers in that way, and he's a decent defender. But Brandon Miller, I think Brandon Miller looks the part. He looks more and more comfortable every time I watch him. And I think overall he's going to end up as the biggest beneficiary, especially if this injury is really long-term. We're talking about a couple of months. In the immediate, it's Terry Rozier. But over the course of the season, if LaMelo Ball misses truly extended time, Brandon Miller could end up becoming the star of this team. And if he does pop off in that way, I'm not saying he's going to win Rookie of the Year because he's got some pretty stiff competition right now. But I think that he's a guy that if he plays well enough, they could end up changing the direction of who exactly are we building this team around? And he's got that sort of potential. I love the way he plays.
Yeah, he's looked good, man. I actually thought he would struggle more than he has. Obviously didn't look good in Summer League, but we've seen plenty of players, play horribly in Summer League and get it figured out. I don't think that's really much of a harbinger, but 150 to 1 right now to win Rookie of the Year. I mean, obviously, I think he would need an injury to probably both of Victor Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren, who are neck and neck at this point, Brandon. Wembanyama, minus 125. Chet Holmgren has closed that gap. He's at minus 110. You got Asar Thompson, 80 to 1, Miller 15 or 150 to 1. And then, Scoot Henderson, Jaime Jaquez, Jordan Hawkins right now as the seventh lowest odds. So it's a two-man race. I wouldn't really recommend betting any of those long shots right now.
A dollar on Brandon Miller won't kill you.
Look, I wouldn't be shocked if Wembanyama or Holmgren get hurt at some point. So maybe $5. Why not? If you're going to do it, make some money on this. All right, I want to talk about some players to consider dropping. Wrote a piece on RotoWire that also ran on Yahoo this week. But before we get to that, Vivid Seats. The NBA season is underway. On behalf of our friends at Vivid Seats, let's get one thing clear. Nothing, Brandon Kravitz, beats seeing your favorite team, the Orlando Magic, crush it on the court to the sound of thousands of screaming fans. Every dunk, dribble, and heart-pounding play from your favorite team live and in person. And because Vivid Seats is the only ticketing company where you can earn rewards, you can score amazing deals and unrivaled annual rewards on every purchase all season long. Plus, they have a 100% buyer guarantee, so you can be sure your ticket is as legit as your love for your team. Visit vividseats.com or download their app today and use our promo code RotoWire for $20 off your first $200 purchase. That's ROTOWIRE, RotoWire. That'll get you $20 off your first purchase of at least $200. Download the app or visit vividseats.com. Vivid Seats, experience it live. I went to the Bucks game this past Friday, and we had a big group of people. Some of them bought their tickets on another app, not Vivid Seats, that will remain unnamed, and they were not allowed into the game because the seats were somehow they were either not delivered or they were kind of bogus tickets. So use Vivid Seats. Avoid that. That group of people had to purchase standing room only tickets and could not sit with the group. So
that means they had to double purchase tickets. That's not. I think
I don't want to give any credence to this other site, but I think they got refunded at least. But it was an entire debacle. They missed the start of the game. I mean, could you imagine not seeing Kyle Kuzma introduced before a Bucks game at Fiserv Forum? I mean, just a brutal experience
at that point.
Yeah, my point is use Vivid Seats. All right, Brandon, I mentioned, I wrote that piece. We do this each week for Yahoo, and we run it on RotoWire, just kind of breaking down players to consider dropping. And the caveat here is, I'm not writing up somebody who's 5% owned or even 20% owned, right? It's guys who are, tough decisions, essentially. It's all right,
you're putting your neck on the line, Nick.
Right. I want to add Jaime Jaquez. I want to add Isaiah Joe. I want to add Dario Saric, but maybe I'm in a 10 or a 12 team league. Who's a player that I might not feel great about dropping, but you can make a case to do it anyway. I'll run through my list and we could talk about a few of these guys. I think they'll be relevant to a lot of people listening and maybe even some of the questions we get in the chat. I want to start with Gary Trent, and this is year 3 of me going through this with Gary Trent. Of course I dropped him in 2 leagues after I probably should have done so 2 weeks ago, and then he had one of his better games of the season last night for Toronto. I can't do it anymore with Gary Trent, man. The steals are starting to dry up. He was a guy who was pretty consistently steal and a half, if not more, per game. He's under a steal per game now this season. The field goal percentage is a huge killer in roto leagues. He'll give you some volume scoring, but he also is prone to shooting 30% over a 2-week span. And weirdly enough for him, he's obviously very 3-point reliant, and that's going to drag down the field goal percentage. But he's under 60% at the free throw line as well this season. That's been just a dramatic fall off for a guy who's been a pretty decent free throw shooter.
Yeah, he's a guy that I thought would be a hot trade candidate, but he hasn't really been playing himself into that discussion. And it was a guy that was brought up a lot last year as well. I just noticed that this has been the case. There seems to be something in the water in Toronto. We were down on Pascal Siakam at first to start the year. It was all about Scotty Barnes. Now, Scotty Barnes, it's not like he's bad, but he's not what he was to start the season. And we haven't seen Gary Trent Jr. really go off at any point. You look up and down the game log, he just doesn't have a string of success yet this season. And so, yeah, if you need to make room on your roster, I'm with you. It was one of my takeaways, and I read this article. You did a great job with it. I agree with almost 100% of your article. So I was like, where can I push back on Nick a little bit? I don't have a lot. I thought you brought up some really good points.
It was tough to write, man, because like I tend to be very cautious, especially if I'm like giving advice to other people, where it's just like I don't want to,
Yeah, you don't want to
your
screw other
fear,
people over.
yeah, your fear is like, yeah, drop Andrew Wiggins, and then he, reels off like 3 25-point games in a row. But I think I did my best to make a strong case, and Gary Trent last year, like I had him on a bunch of teams, and it actually went pretty well. Like he had a 25 game span in the middle of last season where he averaged 21 points per game on 45, 39, 90 from the field. So like there's proven history of Gary Trent having those runs, and he'll probably have them again at some point this season. But it's just field goal percentage has been a problem for me in a few leagues, and like having him just it's such a drain on that category specifically. Like even nights where he gives you 19 20 points, it's a lot of like 5 of 14 shooting and things like that. So Gary Trent made the list pretty easily. Wiggins, I mentioned, he as of yesterday when I wrote this up, he's still 68% rostered in Yahoo leagues, and I get it. But at the same time, there's just not a lot of positive indicators. There was a story Kendra Andrews wrote for ESPN yesterday that noted that the people inside the organization in Golden State are, quote, annoyed at his lack of conditioning. I don't know how that happens. Like, I feel like Andrew Wiggins has never been somebody we've had to question the conditioning, but there's still that, that weird absence last year that nobody really knows exactly what happened. And if you read that piece, it sounds like even the Warriors aren't really sure why he missed so much time. And I don't know if we're going to look back on that and say, man, like Andrew Wiggins was just never quite the same after whatever happened last year.
Or yeah, I mean, it could be a conditioning issue, and maybe that's on him. Maybe that's just something that's going to take time. I'm assuming that you wrote this article prior to him scoring 29 points, getting 10 rebounds, and shooting 61% from the field. I think that
is exactly right, and that is my fear in telling people to drop Andrew Wiggins, because then he goes 11 of 18 last night for 29. So yeah, but I mean that's been a huge outlier, right? I mean, prior to last night, I think he'd only scored 20 points twice on the year.
Yeah, you go back to about 10 days ago, 31 points against the Thunder. That was in an overtime game. So he played really well there. But outside of that, you haven't really seen a lot. I'm not surprised at all to see the percentages of him being rostered, because he's still a big name. People want pieces of the Golden State Warriors, and he's one of the biggest stars that they have. And so when you have the brand value, you're always going to get a longer leash, and it seems like that's what fantasy managers are giving to Andrew Wiggins. I'm not in a I mean, now it's easy for me to say this. I didn't have to write an article, and then he drops 29, but I'm not in a rush to drop him. Yeah, just because you know what he can do. There's only one other guy on the list that I'll push back on.
Yeah, well, last thing I'll say about Wiggins is it's really just points and rebounds at this point. So even on the nights when he's scoring, like he's still probably a better real life player than a fantasy player. It's kind of a 2-category guy. We'll see if the shooting comes around. I mean, free throws, if you're in a category league, that's always been an issue with him. But the free throw shooting has gotten even worse. Who else would you push back on from my list?
I understand you adding him to it, but I still think better days are ahead for Ben Mathurin, and I'm not willing to put him on the wire and have somebody else pick him up. I mean, you brought up the obvious points that if he's not scoring at a high clip, what else is he really giving you? But we saw it last year. He's completely capable of this. And you're talking about an offense that is at the top of the league in scoring, and a guy who has the ability to be a 6th man of the year candidate. He did that in his first year in the NBA. I think this is a sophomore slump right now that he could break out of at any point, and I want to make sure that he's on my roster. So even though it's sort of an ankle weight right now, he's just not a guy that I'm willing to throw back out there.
Yeah, understandable for sure. I think the biggest thing that stood out to me is the lack of minutes. It's like I thought Ben Mathurin could take a pretty big leap this season, and it feels like Indiana's scoring like 135 every single night, and for whatever reason, he's just not a big part of it. Compared to last year, like he averaged almost 29 minutes per game as a rookie, and he's at like 24 minutes a game this season. Like I don't care how much of a microwave scorer you are, like you're just going to have a tough time being fantasy relevant if you're kind of only a points guy and you give a few rebounds here and there. Like that's about it with Mathurin. The 3-point shooting was pretty bad last season and has remained hovering around 32%. If you're only playing 24.6 minutes per game, it's going to be difficult. And the other thing, Brandon, I mean, his free throw rate has basically been cut in half. I mean, that was, I think, something that was really underrated. And one of the reasons that I thought Mathurin could take a big leap this season is like you don't have you don't have a lot of rookie guards come in and average like 6 free throw attempts per game. That's very rare. And he's down to 2.9 per game this season.
Yeah, I also would consider that a guy that we've talked about a lot as being a trade candidate and Buddy Hield. Maybe that opens up some more minutes for Ben Mathurin. And we don't know when something like that could happen. We're already at the end of November. Trade deadline's in February. That'll be here before we know it. I just think better days are ahead. But, yeah, you do have to be concerned when he can shoot at a low percentage on any given night. And he's certainly not giving you a lot in terms of the defensive stats, the stocks, so to speak. But he's a tremendous talent. Right now, is going through a rough stretch. I can just see it now. 3 weeks from now, we're talking about hot waiver ads to target, and it's, hey, look who's back, Ben Mathurin.
Yeah, I mean, based on how some of my leagues are going this season, maybe just read this article as like a waiver pickup instead of players to drop. Just go and pick up all these guys, and you might be better off. Dyson Daniels was somebody that I mentioned. He's down to 32% rostered, so he's a little bit below the threshold of some other players on the list. Obviously, you're rostering him for the steals first and foremost. The assists and the rebounds have been nice. He has at least 1 steal in 15 of 18 games so far this season. I am very curious to see what their rotation looks like tonight. New Orleans is in action. They're home for the 76ers because they're getting CJ McCollum back, which is massive. Trey Murphy is listed as doubtful tonight. I highly doubt he'll play, but I mean, he could be back. I think they play Friday against the Spurs. So we might not get a full representative sample tonight, but once both of those guys are back in the mix, I think Dyson is still in the rotation. I don't think he's approaching, 28, 32 minutes most nights. So I would feel pretty comfortable. If you rostered him for the last month, you probably got the best stretch of the season for him.
Yeah, I think the window's closed. And it will be interesting to see how many minutes do you give to CJ McCollum as far as tonight goes, a guy that's coming back from a collapsed lung. Credit to him for making his way back as quick as he did with an injury like that. Missing 12 games is a lot, but when you're talking about a collapsed lung, it feels like a drop in the bucket. By the way, my best bet tonight, and the line has already moved, took the Sixers at -1.5. Love every second of it. This was one of my staples. When you and I started this podcast, I ran down my list of things I look for when betting. When stars are reinserted into a lineup, especially if that team's been playing well, it tends to ruin chemistry, and people can't wait to bet the team that's getting the guy back. But it doesn't always work like that. It takes a minute. And this group had actually been playing well together, adding CJ McCollum back to the mix. And we don't know that he's getting full minutes either against the 76ers team that covers the spread as well as anybody. So if you're looking for a little action tonight, maybe you can tail me on that.
Yeah, and if you want a full betting breakdown of every slate, myself, Alex Barutha, we're on SiriusXM NBA Radio at 7 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, breaking down every game, giving out our best bets. One of mine last night, Brandon, was a nice little player prop parlay. We had Cat over 9.5 boards, which hit no problem. OKC is a terrible rebounding team. All we needed was 2 3-pointers out of DeAndre Hunter. He went 1 for 6. 1 for 6. We got the attempts.
That is painful.
Our heart was in the right place. But nevertheless, check that show out on SiriusXM. You can listen to it back on the SXM app as well. All right, Brandon, let's hit the last read here, and then we'll get into some listener questions. I also want to talk about some of the fantasy MVPs of the season and talk about a great page on Yahoo where you can look at basically which players are highest rostered on the teams that are doing the best this season. But we got a message from Rival Fantasy. LeBron versus Jordan, Magic versus Bird, Barkley versus McHale. Basketball is synonymous with legendary player rivalries. They make the game more fun, and they give fans storylines that raise the stakes every time those players meet on the court or come up in conversation. Now, every matchup and head-to-head debate can be settled on Rival Fantasy. This NBA season, you can play challenges where you decide which NBA player will score more fantasy points in their next game. You can play the Rival Fantasy in-house challenges or create your own and get a friend in the mix with customizable social challenges. Join rival.com/RotoWire. That's where you can sign up. You can get a $200 deposit match. Get in on this right now before we get too deep into the NBA season. That's joinrival.com/RotoWire. It's time to step up to the challenge on Rival Fantasy. We will see you in the arena. All right, so I mentioned that MVPs page over on Yahoo, which is a tool that they have for fantasy baseball, fantasy football as well. And it basically says, all right, the best teams. I think they take like the top 10 or 20% of the best performing teams and you can sort by roto or head to head to get a better gauge. And they say, all right, what percentage rostered are certain players that are making these teams so good? Unsurprisingly, Brandon, Tyrese Maxey is rostered on 28% of the top performing fantasy teams on Yahoo.
Not surprised by that at all, just based on where he was drafted, and he was pushed down because of the James Harden presence, and he was a steal for those that invested in him as if he was going to be the number 2 to Joel Embiid. You didn't have to pay that price. That's the reason why he ends up so high on a list like this, because you got Maxey. Just think about who you were able to draft prior to even adding him to your roster. So that one makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that was not surprising at all. I mean, that's still a pretty stunning percentage. 28% is extremely high. After that, Brook Lopez, 21.2%. And Tobias Harris, 20.8%. Very quietly having a great Roto League season.
Yeah, that one surprised me. I don't know exactly where that one's coming from, but the Brook Lopez, him being towards the top of this list, I think tells an interesting story where if you're not getting Jokic or Embiid in terms of the center position, then you're probably waiting. You're better off waiting until a very specific point in the draft to target center, because you need to load up at these other positions. And if you're able to get a value in terms of your big, then you're going to have a leg up. I think that's the reason why when you scroll down the list, you don't have to go very far before you see guys like Vooch and Valanciunas and Mark Williams and Brook Lopez, because of the season he's having, is at the top of that list.
Yeah, he's inside the top 25 if you go by total value. Obviously somebody who hasn't missed any time yet. Per game value, he's still inside the top 40, doing large parts of the blocks, right? I mean, for a big man who plays a ton of minutes, it's always a weird stat line. Like, he doesn't rebound at nearly the rate that you would think. He's only at about 5 boards per game. Doesn't really pass all that much, 1.3 assists, but just under a steal per game, at 2.8 blocks per game, 50% from the field, giving you almost 2 3-pointers as well. So I had big concerns coming into the year about, will Brook Lopez hold up for a second straight season? Like, he had back surgery 2 years ago, and I felt like last year was the best case scenario. I mean, like, what did he play, like 75, 77 games? I thought they'd be a little more cautious with him, but we also have seen, I mean, Milwaukee, they absolutely need Brook Lopez on the floor defensively. I mean, if he misses any stretch of time this season, that could be disastrous for a defense that's already struggled.
Yeah, he's low key one of their MVPs, and I think Milwaukee has started to put it together, but he's been the constant all along the way, and amazing at his age that he's not dropping off. He's like the Travis Kelce of the NBA at this point.
He just keeps getting better and better, man. I mean, he had 39 the other night when I was in the house against Washington. There's a few interesting names on this list, like D'Angelo Russell ranks pretty high. He's rostered on 15% of the best Yahoo teams.
That was one that stood out to me too. Is it because he shoots a high percentage from 3? That's the only thing I could put together.
Yeah, that one. I mean, I guess maybe he was going so late in drafts that if you got him around pick 100 and he's been like a top 75 guy, you're getting some pretty serious value there. But I still don't feel like he's been that good. Austin Reeves making the list too. That's pretty surprising. I mean, he's got it together somewhat. Like, the percentages are starting to come around, but it doesn't feel like Austin Reeves is having the kind of post-contract breakout that we thought.
Yeah, and a couple of the names that weren't towards the top of the list surprised me as much as anything. You have to scroll down pretty far to find Asar Thompson, who's been a revelation in the category scoring format. There was another name that jumped out to me as well. I'm blanking on it right now. Oh, Tyrese Halliburton, only 12.4%.
I think the thing with Halliburton is he was going so high that he's just kind of performing as expected, right? I mean, he's
not raising the level of your fantasy squad. He's just
I mean, for the most part, it's like these are guys that are well outperforming their ADP as opposed to guys who are beating it. But then you got SGA, who's 18% rostered on these successful teams. Chet Holmgren, 21%. That makes sense as well.
Some of this stuff, I think, does tell a story, and then with others, like SGA being at 18% and Tyrese Halliburton being at 12%, I think is more random than anything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, when you see Chet Holmgren towards the top, there's there's real value and substance in that. Tyrese Maxey at number 1. Yeah. Jalen Johnson, who's not too far down the list. Scotty Barnes, those guys. Those seem to be the difference-making players, but some of these other guys that are at the top, or like Jokic being at 14%. I mean, that's certainly not hurting your fantasy team.
All right, let's get into some live listener questions. Our guy Freaky, always a staple on the streams, he asks, guys, I got to drop 2 of these players I drafted on a 3 punt. Tyus Jones, Bruce Brown, Scoot Henderson, or Klay Thompson.
I got to drop 2. Man, I want to hold on to Scoot Henderson so bad.
Well, so it's also relevant here that if I'm reading this correctly, he's punting 3s. So obviously Klay to me is kind of the outlier, but if you're punting 3s, that becomes a little bit more palatable. I would try to trade Klay as opposed to dropping him though.
Yeah. I think I'd let go of, well, if you get to punt 3s, maybe Scoot Henderson, you hang on to him, hang on to Tyus Jones stubbornly. I guess Bruce Brown and Klay Thompson, as crazy as that sounds.
Yeah, specifically because you're punting 3s. I think Klay's going to come around at some point. He's not that old. I don't think he's completely fallen off a cliff yet. And, Bruce Brown's played better of late. I mean, he was pretty rough to begin the year, but, the steals have really come around. He's got multiple steals in 4 straight games. The assists are starting to climb as well. He's at 12, 3.5 boards, 3 assists, 1.7 steals with pretty good percentages over his last 6. Not really giving you a whole lot from 3, but that's, not really what you're banking on when it comes to Bruce Brown anyway. So he's been, to me, about as expected. It's a pretty tough choice. I mean, we get a ton of questions, Brandon, about Tyus Jones and really the Wizards in general. It's been really up and down. In that Milwaukee game, Tyus Jones, 22, 7-7 with a steal. Like, that's kind of what we thought we would get a lot more offense this season. But, and of course, one night later, 4 points, 4 assists in 24 minutes.
You mean, who knows? Maybe better days are ahead for the Washington Wizards. I'm going to see them at the Amway Center tonight, so I can give you the full report of what that team looks like in person.
If you could get in there and ask Tyus Jones, like, hey, what's going on with your fantasy performance? Man, we need a little more out of you.
Getting a lot of questions about you, bud.
Ian asked, all right, 9-category league. He's got to choose one of these 3. Keyonte George, Scoot Henderson, or it says Keyonte George and Scoot Henderson, or Strus, I assume is Max Strus. So basically, would you prefer the George/Scoot side of this or Max Strus?
I think I'd go with Max Strus. Just give me the better player with a high shooting that's good from 3.
Yeah, I mean, Keyonte George, I'm starting to come around. I was not really a believer early on. It was kind of just the assists that you were chasing there, and he's started to play more minutes. He's started to do a little bit more outside of that. He's at 14, 4, and 6 over his last 7 games. He's just, he's going to kill you in the percentages, much like Scoot Henderson. So, and especially with this being a 9-cat league, like Scoot's going to be a high turnover guy. He has been already. I don't think that's really going to change. I mean, Portland in general is just a high turnover team. So in 9 categories specifically, I think I would lean Strus because, both Scoot and Keyonte George could shoot under 40%. They could both be 3-4 turnover per game guys. And I think that's going to hurt you more than it's going to help you.
I mean, look at some of these percentages for Max Strus. There's just not a lot of guys in the league that are giving you this with the volume that he's shooting from 3. 43%, 44%, 43%, 50, 50, 33, 50. Those are really good numbers. And if you're chasing category scoring, you need that. He's been playing really well.
All right, our guy Mal says 9-category league. Should I drop Brogdon or Bogdanovic? He said he's punting, field goal, and free throw percentage this week. I know the percentages for Brogdon haven't been great so far, so that's a little relevant. But I don't think for either of these guys, you're necessarily all that worried about short term field goal and free throw percentage. This is an interesting one though. I mean, Brogdon continues to play pretty well as kind of the elder statesman, of this Portland Trailblazers team. The counting stats have been there for the most part: 18, 4, and 6. He's averaging his most assists per game since his first year in Indiana back in 2019-20. But he is shooting 41% from the field, so that's been the one drawback. Do you have a strong lean one way or the other here?
Yeah, I mean, you'd expect more defensive stats from Brogdon being the defender that he is, and he's not really giving that. Maybe that corrects itself. Maybe the problem is that he's on an island in Portland, but I would still go Malcolm Brogdon here. I mean, as far as the player I'd want to keep on my roster, I know they were asking who they want to drop.
Right. I mean, it's been a debate because you could argue that Bogdanovic has been just as good, if not better, over the last couple of weeks. I think, with Jalen Johnson going down, you're immediately thinking, all right, Sadiq Bey, DeAndre Hunter, but I think there's been some trickle down to Bogdanovic as well. I mean, he's averaging almost 20 points per game over his last 8, not doing a whole lot outside of that. Like, he is giving you over a steal per game, but not really rebounding all that much, not really giving you any assists. So kind of depends what categories you're targeting. He has been shooting a ton of threes. I mean, he's taken 10 or more threes in 5 of his last 8 games. So if that's a category of need for you this week, I would look into that when it comes to Bogdanovic. And schedule wise, the Hawks play Thursday and Saturday, and the Portland Trailblazers the rest of the week, they play Thursday and Saturday. So about the same. I mean, that's really close. I think I would probably give slight lean to Brogdon as well. All right. Ian asks, I have KD and Kawhi. I'm worried about their rest of season health and might cause me to lose. Any advice if I can flip them and who I should be targeting? This is a question that we get a lot and something that we've talked about on a bunch of pods. Like I feel the same way. I mean, for the most part, I don't draft KD or Kawhi. I had Kawhi on one team last year, and it actually went okay, considering how many games he missed. Like, he was so good when he played that it kind of made up for it. But I understand the concern. I think you and I talked about this last week. Like, do you who are like realistic targets, I guess, if you feel like, all right, I got a great 20 games out of KD, but I think he's going to miss 20 at some point. You should be able to get just about anybody, right? I mean, there's a list of maybe.
We talked about Tyrese Maxey's at 28% in terms of the most successful teams in fantasy. Yeah. Can you flip him for a Maxey?
I think, somebody like that, Maxey, you could look at like Scotty Barnes. I mean, you could try to do, I don't know, Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah. Somebody Anthony Edwards, you could strike while the iron's hot. Anthony Edwards took a tough spill last night, but he should be okay. Right. So he's a guy you could target.
Right. I would throw out a ton of offers. I mean, you might be able to get Jason Tatum even. Like, I would much rather have him. I know Durant's been the better fantasy player this year, but Tatum has a vastly better track record of health. Trey Young is another guy. Yeah. You should be able to do okay there. And he follows up and says, all right, would you do Durant, Kawhi, and Brogdon for SGA, Cam Johnson, and Hero?
Yeah, I'm not.
I really want SGA for sure.
Yeah.
But packaging Kawhi and KD, like, I think I'd rather try to sell those guys in separate deals.
Agreed. Completely agreed. I think you're bringing on a great player. You're kind of, your mindset's, your head's in the right place here, but I think you're going a little bit too hard in the paint, to use a basketball reference.
Yeah. Or a Waka Flocka Flame reference as well. All right. We have a self-described noob question from
Love
Eon.
The noobs.
He said, it's my first year in Roto. If my player has a game and I put him in my active slot, but he's a DNP, so he either doesn't play or he's hurt, does it consume a game at the position? I think so. It depends on your league, right? Like, if you're in a weekly league and let's say you have Lauri Markkanen in your lineup on Monday and he didn't play, he's locked for the rest of the week, right? Unless you have a league where, like the NFBKC, for example, you could set another lineup that runs from Friday to Sunday. But most leagues, that are weekly, if that player doesn't play, he's still in your lineup for the week. You can't remove him. It counts as like an active game. If you're in daily lineup leagues, obviously you could get him out of there. I assume he might be asking about like leagues that have game limits per week. That's super league specific. I'm not really sure. I think it does count though.
I would think so. I mean, either way, if the player is in your starting lineup and the lineup's locked, whether that's for the week or for the day, then that player's taking up that spot, even if they're a DNP. And this is the frustrating part of fantasy props betting in the NBA. It's something you have to deal with, and you have to wrap your head around through the course of the season. You might not find out until they do the player introductions.
Yeah, it does feel like it's gotten a little better compared to last year. Am I wrong on that? Like, I felt like at this point last season, we were already up in arms, and it was like, man, this is playing fantasy basketball. It's just it's a losing game. If you're in a weekly lineup league, it's been a disaster. Like, I do feel like, I don't know if it's by virtue of the in-season tournament or not. I would say probably not, that we haven't seen as many teams, going to the extremes when it comes to rest specifically.
I do remember last year being pretty problematic.
Last year was bad.
So it doesn't feel that. So it's either we've become desensitized to it or it has gotten better. Mm-hmm. I don't know which is true.
Any update on the Jeremy Sochan injury? I have not seen anything today or yesterday. Sochan exited Sunday against Denver with what they just said was knee soreness. Was ruled out for the rest of that game. I'm not really sure. Kind of a unique situation because they were off Monday, they were off yesterday, they're off tonight, and then they play Thursday against Atlanta, and they have a back-to-back Friday at New Orleans. So we'll get news today, but it's kind of like the NFL. Like if a team plays on Monday night, you're always like a day behind on the injury report. So they're not really going to say anything on Monday when the game's not until Thursday. But we should get an update. The NBA mandates that we get an update at some point today on Sochan. But the fact that it's knee soreness as opposed to him going to the ground with like a true knee injury, maybe he misses these next couple of games. I don't think it would be long term.
No, I don't see how. Especially if he didn't have a serious knee injury last year. I think that's when you look at a soreness injury and you can say that that's going to keep him out for an extended length of time. I believe that that's the actual diagnosis for Markelle Fultz right now is knee soreness. But he's a guy who came off of a serious knee injury. I don't think Sochan's dealing with that.
Well, let's talk about Fultz, by the way. What is going on there? We get a ton of questions about Markelle Fultz. Do you have any insight beyond the basic injury reports?
I can tell you that he is. I saw him running stairs the other day in the arena, so it's not like he can't move. It's an injury maintenance thing. I honestly have no idea what the timeline is, but he looks good to me. And my guess is he's going to make his way back soon. I think we see Wendell Carter Jr. back in the starting lineup before we see Markelle Fultz. But just guessing, I'd be surprised if we went another full month without Fultz in the lineup.
All right, interesting trade question here from our guy James. Jerami Grant and Jordan Clarkson for John Collins and Anfernee Simons.
I think I'd rather have the first end.
Yeah, this is a really even trade. I was kind of leaning the other way because I think I want Anfernee Simons most. John Collins has been about as expected. He's been extremely consistent, if nothing else, right? I actually kind of thought he might have an opportunity to take a bigger leap, but unfortunately, the shot blocking may never come back. And part of it is he's basically playing the 3 in Utah, so he doesn't have as many opportunities. But I guess we're now talking like 4 years ago. He was a 1.6 blocks per game guy, and now he's half of that this season. Not really giving you any steals. He's under an assist per game, so you're really just targeting him for points, rebounds, and threes, which is fine. Shoots a good percentage as well. He's over 40% from 3. Jerami Grant, fairly limited as a fantasy player. Points, rebounds. Every now and then you'll get the defensive stats as well. But I think if you're chasing upside, like if you're in the middle of the pack or you're kind of lower down in your league, I wouldn't mind taking a chance on Simons because I think he's the best player and the highest upside guy in the deal.
Yeah, these sort of deals, like I end up just sort of going, why? What's the purpose of it? When you're doing a 2 for 2 and it's even across the board, I just think there are better deals to be. I think we're just making trades to make trades at that point.
Wow.
Which what? Hey, if you want to do that, what?
I sympathize with that, right? It's tough if you're in like a like the RotoWire Stake League, for example, 16 teams. It's like there's you'll move up or down 5 spots at any given night, and it's tough to sit there idly if you're going in the wrong direction.
It's true. If you're trying to send your team a message, then you go ahead, get it done.
Yeah, you got to think about the locker room, right? What does Jerami Grant mean to your team? Is he a veteran leader on that team? Good point. We just talked about Fultz, but we'll address this one from Ian. Do I continue to keep Fultz on the IL in a 12-team 9-cat, or is he droppable? I got the sense from what you just said, Brandon, that you'd probably keep him in that slot for now.
Yeah, and I think he's going to put up numbers when he comes back. And he'll be somebody that'll fill up some of those categories that you need. What's amazing about what the Magic are doing right now, outside of the fact that they're doing it, that they've won 7 in a row, which they haven't done since Dwight Howard was on the roster, is that they're doing.
Oh, that's it.
That's it.
Wow.
12 wins on the season. Incredible. And it should continue. They have 2 games against the Wizards coming up this week. But I know we're looking at a 10-game winning streak coming up. What was that? Where was I going with that? Oh, they're doing it without a true point guard. I mean, Anthony Black I can't even say he's playing bad. Like I don't even notice he's out there sometimes. He's not doing anything. And Cole Anthony's played great, but they're keeping his role to a sixth man off the bench, microwave scorer type. So when Fultz comes back, he's as much as they're just winning no matter what, like they need what he brings to the table. You got to have a point guard in the NBA if you're going to have sustained success.
All right, 10-team, 9-category league. Keyonte George is available. Should I drop Anunoby or Jalen Williams for him? I would say no.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
No, I know Anunoby's been pretty disappointing so far. He's ranked actually outside the top 100, which is pretty shocking. You know, the free throw percentage has been really bad. He's hovering around 60%. Although he's not really taking that many.
Players are just so disappointing this year.
Yeah, unless you have Scotty Barnes or I guess Dennis Schroeder, it's been pretty disappointing. Although Siakam's gotten it together. You know, I complained a lot about him early in the season, and his overall ranking is still not great. Partially because he's just not giving you any defensive stats and the free throw percentage. And I feel like every game he's like 4 for 6 from three or from the line. But the counting stats have started to come back with him. I mean, again, it's not the value that you were hoping for, but I actually am pretty optimistic about Siakam. Yeah, Anunoby's tough. I mean, that's a guy that you were drafting maybe as high as the 5th or 6th round. And, to cut bait on him for Keyonte George would feel like selling at the absolute bottom. I'm very pro Jalen Williams. I know he missed some time recently that maybe, rubbed some people the wrong way, but I'm still pretty high on him. I definitely would not drop Jalen Williams. I think the arrival of Chet Holmgren, has maybe rubbed a little bit of the upside off of Williams, but he's still, to find a guy like him at his age who's like guaranteed to shoot 50% from the field, and he's been an awesome free throw shooter at a fairly high volume, 17, 4, and 4 every night on good percentages. I definitely would not cut bait there, but the Anunoby question is weirdly a fair one.
It is, and I get it. When a guy heats up the way that Keyonte George has, you want to get your hands on that. It's tempting, but is it sustainable? I just don't really know what we're chasing with him. Is Keyonte George the kind of guy that's going to put your roster over the top? I don't think so. OG Anunoby at his best is one of those types of players, so as frustrating as it is, unless you just, like Nick said, I think that this all comes down to a lot of these questions, and we'll repeat this as much as we need to just steady your minds out there. A lot of this comes down to, what does your team look like in terms of win-loss record? Are you on a streak in a negative direction and you just need to make a move to do something different? I totally get that. But if that's not the case, then I just don't think Keyonte George is going to keep up what I think. He's on a nice little stretch here, double-digit points in each of his last 3, but I don't think that this is something that's uber sustainable with all the mouths they have to feed in that Utah offense.
See, I actually think it's fairly sustainable because I think this team's going in the wrong direction, and I think he's going to play a ton of minutes the rest of the way. The percentages, the turnovers in a 9-category league, I think he's going to be a good player in terms of when the counting stats are there, but rookie guards just tend to not be good fantasy players. And I think on balance, if you're asking like, who's the better fantasy player for the rest of the year, who has a better chance to finish higher, it's got to be Anunoby, right? I mean, I think you have to look at this as kind of just a slow start, and maybe he gets moved, and that might be for the best for Anunoby at this point. Who would you prefer rest of season, Tyus Jones or Khris Middleton in a 9-category roto league? Tough. If you think Middleton's staying healthy, I would definitely take Middleton. He's still putting up decent numbers despite playing 20 minutes a game. He's still giving you 12, 4, and 4. And, I think eventually he gets to the point where maybe he's not playing 35 minutes a night, but even 28 minutes a night would be huge for Middleton.
Yeah, it's tough with Middleton because you can see the decline so evident, but he's still at his best a pretty good player. Not shooting at a great percentage. The 3 balls at 33% in terms of the month of November. It was even worse prior to that. It just feels like he's starting to decay a little bit too quickly for me. And I like Tyus Jones. We've already seen the worst days for the Washington Wizards. I mean, it literally can't get any worse. So if you made it this far, I think I'd stick with Tyus Jones.
Okay. Well, agree to disagree on that one. Middleton it's been disappointing from 3, but he's shooting like 70% in the mid range, and that's still carrying him to like 47% from the field overall. So that's been offset to some degree. If you look at the per 36 numbers, he's right in line with where he's been in his best seasons, right? I mean, per 36, he's had 22 points, almost 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 1.2 steals. I mean, that is right in line with what you think of for Khris Middleton before all the injuries set in. So if you're sticking with Khris, you have to accept the injury risk, and at any point the knee could go in the wrong direction. But again, like you always say, it kind of depends where you are in your league. And I think if you've been holding Khris Middleton to like punt on him now, as he seems to be kind of ascending in the right direction, like I don't think he's going to play 22 minutes most nights the rest of the season. Like they're going to bump that up at some point. So I would chase that upside. James says, where do you think LaVine will end up after the trade deadline? I have him on my team. Should I trade him?
Ooh, I think you should wait. He becomes much more valuable on a new roster. So we don't know. I mean, we'd be guessing at this point, but that's just the way that it goes. Is when a guy gets traded, his value soars because we all think so optimistically about what this guy's upside in a new offense could be and all of that. Mm-hmm. I would trade him the day he gets dealt. That would be my move. He's holding up a Heat jersey. I put him on the block.
So you think, if he lands in Miami or he lands in Philly or Los Angeles, like that's a better situation than Chicago? Because I mean, the Bulls are a disaster and they play at a slow pace. I get all that, but I don't know if he's going to a team where it's like, all right, you're the number one option now. It's like, I think it would be, and you can make the argument that he's, it's kind of a 3-man team in Chicago, right? With Vucevic and DeRozan. But if he goes to LA or he goes to Philly, it's like you're playing alongside Embiid. I think if anything, if he lands in Philly, that's not good for Tyrese Maxey. That would be a disappointment. No. But in general, it's like, is he going somewhere where he fits in similarly in terms of like the hierarchy in the offense?
Probably not, but I also think that his efficiency could see a boost. Yeah. So
I think he's just sick of playing for the Bulls.
Yeah, you can get a balance there, but I think in terms of changing overall values, it really is going to impact the guys that are playing around him more than him. A team that's trading for him, we've said this about Buddy Hield all the way through. If you're trading for Zach LaVine, you're trading for something very specific. You're going to use him for that role. So he's still going to get his, and I think he can do it at a more efficient clip. But how does it impact the guys around him? We just don't know where he's going to go. So we're just guessing.
Yeah. My guess is it is one of those teams. I think it's a contending team. I don't really see.
I don't think Philly's going to do it though. Philly's kind of. I think Philly is good where they're at. I really think that they're happy to just run everything through the 2-man game of Embiid and Maxey and just get contributions from the role guys. I get the impression that they're not going to make a move like that. Miami, maybe because they've swung and missed so many times on stars, they'd make a move, and the Lakers are never out of it when it comes to a discussion like this. So I would say Lakers, Heat feel like the most likely.
All right, we got a couple of Trey Murphy questions that we'll hit. Thoughts on Trey Murphy? Can he be in the top 75? That comes from Ian. And then Victor asks, better rest of season, Bojan Bogdanovic, so we're talking Pistons, or Trey Murphy in a points league? To that second question, I would say maybe Bojan. We had Dan Titus, one of the great fantasy basketball minds on the XM show last night. He was pretty optimistic on Bogdanovic. I feel like it could go either way. Detroit's been such a disaster. They're 4-38 in their last 42 games. They're going for 15 straight losses tonight. So you can kind of see it's like, is Bojan Bogdanovic the missing piece? I don't think so. But this is also kind of a delusional franchise that might just throw him in there for 30 minutes a night and be like, hey, we need to raise our floor night to night. So in a points league, I think I might give slight favor to Bojan. Just, be prepared for some sort of antics, whether that's like trading him or his role, going all over the place night to night. The thing with Trey Murphy is he is very 3-point dependent. He's an amazing 3-point shooter. He's high volume. He's over 40%. I think that should continue. But the Pelicans are going to be a fascinating roster once he's back. And again, that could come as soon as Friday against the Spurs. He's doubtful to play tonight. I don't think we see him on the court. We will get McCollum back, but not Murphy. But he should be back within the next 2 or 3 games at worst. At that point, you got McCollum, you got Jose Alvarado back in the mix. Obviously, Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Dyson Daniels, Jordan Hawkins. Matt Ryan might even be a part of this rotation. Najee Marshall, Zion. Like, I guess the overall question is like, is there enough room for Trey Murphy to put up the type of season that he did last year when he saw 31 minutes a game.
No, and he put up some great numbers last year, but it's just simply not sustainable with the guys that they've got that are going to get theirs on that Pelicans squad. He's got the potential to do it. I think he'll be productive, but to ask for what he was able to produce last year is just simply unrealistic.
How much of that comes down to Zion specifically? Because I think nobody benefited more from Zion playing 29 games than Trey Murphy, who played 79 last year.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. And Zion's playing well right now, so there's no reason to limit his minutes. And you're getting McCollum back. Brandon Ingram's going to get his. And Alvarado. I mean, it's just – we talked about guys like Dyson Daniels. I mean, Jordan Hawkins has had positive moments with this team as well. So it's just – there's so many mouths to feed. It's a good problem to have if you're a Pelicans fan, but right now, in terms of overall optimism for Trey Murphy, it's hard to get there. But you certainly like the player, so he's somebody I want on my roster. But I think you got to keep your expectations in check.
Okay, we got a few more, and then we'll get out of here. Is Mike Conley a must roster? Depending on your league size, I would say yes. 10, 12 team league, he's probably should be rostered. He's 36 at this point, so you do worry about that catching up to him at some point. But he played 67 games last year. He played 72 the year before. He had some injuries his first couple of years in Utah, but for the most part, I think his game should age pretty well. We're seeing more and more guys from those 2006, 2007, 2008 drafts play later and later into their careers. The assists are really the thing you're chasing here, and those have been there for the most part this year. He's been doing pretty well, racking up steals as well. Low volume on offense, but he's been pretty efficient. He did take 10 3-pointers last night. I would say he's a must roster for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I like pieces of good teams, and the Minnesota Timberwolves are playing as good as anybody else. I don't know if Anthony Edwards is going to miss any time. I'm not sure if that's a positive for him or not, just because of the distribution that you get from Mike Conley. But usage would certainly be up. I like him, and he's going to give you a couple steals per game too.
Yeah, the one thing with him is the free throws have completely dropped off, and that happens to point guards later in their career. He's not missed a free throw this season, but he also has barely taken any. He's only taken 14 total free throws in 17 games, so losing some value there. But in general, I think you want the assists, you want the steals, you want the dependability. Speaking of Mike Conley, Asar Thompson and Keyonte George, or OG and Conley in a 9-category league.
After glancing at Keyonte George's stats over the last couple of games, I think I might be slightly intoxicated. We're getting a lot of questions about him, but Asar Thompson, I love what he's been able to do this year with the Pistons. It seems like, he's a guy that's just going to give you defensive production like not a lot of other players, certainly at his youth, are going to in the NBA. I don't want to trade Asar Thompson, so that makes it easy for me. And I get the scoring with Keyonte George, so that's got to be the side.
Yeah, got it. Two schools of thought here, right? You got basically two rookies versus two established veterans who have been, have the track record, who've been better fantasy players throughout their career. But yeah, it's tough to part ways with Asar Thompson right now. In a category league, there are some pitfalls, obviously. The percentages and the fact that he just can't shoot threes whatsoever is a problem. But I think there is a little bit more upside on that side of it. Do you think it's time to get rid of Josh Giddey? My replacement choices are Jaden Ivey, Cole Anthony, and DeAndre Hunter.
Well, Cole's playing great. DeAndre Hunter's playing great. So, yeah.
I don't want Ivey. I know he's playing more lately. I just don't trust the Pistons with him. And he's also a better real life player than fantasy player. So I would not drop Giddey for Ivey. And, obviously there's the off the court stuff that could be a part of this. My read on it right now is I just don't see a suspension or anything coming in the near future. There's all kinds of random reporting, most of it coming from TMZ and BSO and stuff. So I don't know what to believe with that, but I think if the Thunder thought this was a major problem, that they wouldn't have thrown him out there the other night. To me, that says a lot, that all this, kind of broke over Thanksgiving weekend. And obviously everybody was aware of it. And Giddey got asked about it at practice. and they still played him the other night. I think that would have sent a little bit more fear into me if they held him out. I think they feel pretty confident that he's going to be on the right side of this, whatever that actually means. But yeah, I think Cole Anthony and DeAndre Hunter versus Giddey in a vacuum, if we just remove that from the equation, that becomes a more interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like Giddey, you take the off the court stuff out of it, which could become part of the equation, makes this question a lot easier to answer. But if you remove that, it's not like Giddey's been lighting it up. So
right.
I don't think you probably drafted him. He's not quite living up to his ADP at this point. I think I'd have a hard time getting rid of Josh Giddey just because he is such an incredible player. And if there is no suspension, he's probably going to see much better days ahead than what he's giving you right now. But yeah, I mean, flip a coin. Cole Anthony, DeAndre Hunter, I'd love to roster both of those guys.
I would go Hunter first, with the caveat that, you got a month here without Jalen Johnson. And that's, I think, when you're really going to make your bones on Hunter. And there's going to be probably a reduction after that. With Cole Anthony, you just worry about what happens when Fultz comes back.
Yeah. Yeah, I think his role's pretty much solidified, especially if he continues to score the basketball the way that he has. They're not going to limit his minutes because Markelle Fultz is back in the rotation, because they play a completely different style. Fultz is going to distribute, Cole's going to score, and for a team that struggles on the offensive end, they haven't been lately, but that's going to be their issue whenever they do end up settling back closer to the mean of what they are. They need what Cole Anthony provides, and he's been a much better defender too. So it's starting to show up a little bit in the stats, but I can just tell you from watching him up close and personal, it's a part of his game he's put a lot of energy and emphasis into getting better at.
All right, two more. Justin asks Cam Thomas rest of season outlook once he returns. This is so difficult because he's such a unique player. Brooklyn, they're hanging around. They're 9-8 right now. Like, I think they're going to be in that play-in mix. So ultimately, I think it's not just going to be all right, go get your numbers situation. Like, I think they're still going to prioritize winning games. Cam Thomas, for what it's worth, did not play last night against Toronto. Seems like he's getting close. Could be back Thursday. They play Saturday against Orlando as well. Like when he was going on his run earlier in the season, Cam Johnson had been out of the lineup. They had a few other injuries. Ben Simmons, who knows if or when he's coming back. When it comes to Cam Thomas, I mean, it's an interesting thing from a fantasy perspective because you're really just chasing the points, the threes, and the free throws, which are valuable categories, right? And I think even if he's playing reduced minutes, in a bench role like we saw at times last season, like he could still pretty easily get you 20 plus a night. So I'm optimistic, man. I mean, I think he's somebody that we always knew had this ability. And, in the past, they never really threw him out there. I think there were some defensive concerns, some continuity concerns, but, it was encouraging to me that they were willing to, play him 30 plus minutes per game to start the year.
Yeah, I mean, you are chasing points, but he's also a guy that's worth chasing in that category. There aren't a lot of players in the NBA that even have the ability to put up 40 plus, and he is one of them. So I'm a sucker for his production. I think he's somebody I would definitely hang on to, target. However it is you're viewing that as you look for the outlook.
Okay, last one. Do you think Scoot Henderson could pick it up soon and perhaps be a top 100 player at least this season? And our guy is playing in a 9-category league. I think we'll see plenty of flashes. I think he will pick it up. I think there will be weeks where he looks really good. I would be pretty surprised if Scoot Henderson finishes the year inside the top 100, especially in a 9-cat league. I don't really see that being the case. I think turnovers are going to continue to be an issue. I mean, how many games has he played? He's played 8 games this season. He's had at least 4 turnovers in 5 of those games, playing fairly limited minutes. I just think, the guys around him in Portland aren't really going to help, especially once Anfernee Simons is back. I think that takes away some of the scoring upside. So I think we're going to come out of the season like feeling pretty good about Scoot, the player, going forward. I don't see us, looking back and saying, wow, what a great second half. He finished 88th in fantasy. Like rookie guards in general, like that, it just doesn't happen. Even rookie guards who play really well, those guys don't finish high in fantasy.
Yeah, I know we didn't get a large look at a large sample of him in the summer league, but what I saw, I mean, it just makes me not want to watch it anymore because I just get drunk off of this limited information that we have. And he looked amazing. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily translate to the NBA regular season, and he hasn't put it together yet. He's not getting the minutes, and we just haven't seen that level of production. So while I certainly believe in the player, and he's a guy that I might stubbornly hold on to a little bit longer, the most likely scenario is that he finishes outside of the top 100.
Here's some context on that, Brandon. Anthony Edwards, as a rookie, 9 category per game value, he finished 117th. And Scoot Henderson has the potential maybe for more assists than Anthony Edwards did, but that felt like a pretty damn good rookie season for Anthony Edwards, and he still finished outside the top 115. Like it just doesn't happen very often. Like rookies in general, but especially rookie guards, and especially in 9 category leagues, you just don't see many guys step in as like really good fantasy assets right away, even if the counting stats are there.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a really hard position to excel in early on in your NBA career.
Yeah. Okay, we got one more coming in under the gun here from Daniel. Terry Rozier or Miles Bridges? Should I keep both or drop one to pick up Cam Johnson? It's in an 8-team league. That's got to be fun. You got to feel pretty good about your roster.
I think it's so.
I would not drop Miles Bridges. I think he's got too much upside. I would take him over Cam Johnson. Rozier versus Johnson is an interesting one, though.
Yeah, with the LaMelo Ball injury, I don't think I would drop either. Let me see how this one shakes out, and we'll see who ends up with the most production with him not on the floor. But my guess is Rozier is going to do pretty well, and I agree. Miles Bridges, his upside, he's looked really good as of late, and it looks like Steve Clifford's getting more comfortable with involving him in that offense.
Yeah, I would probably stick with those two. I mean, Rozier versus Cam, I think it's going to be really, really close. I think for the next month, you might want Rozier. I think for the balance of the season, you might want Cam Johnson. I think the percentages with Cam, that's what might sway me. Rozier is not a great free throw shooter, takes a decent amount. Cameron Johnson, could be like close to 90% at the line. Should be more efficient, as a shooter as well. And I think Rozier could average more points, but I think the efficiency with Johnson might push him over the top. So I would go Cam Johnson and Miles Bridges if I'm picking 2 of those 3. All right, Brandon, let's get out of here, man. Fun chat with you, as always. Thank you to everybody who gave us some great questions in the chat. We always appreciate that. You can go back. You can listen to the archive version over on YouTube, RotoWire Fantasy Basketball channel. Please subscribe. We're trying to build that out as big as we can this season. You can also check out the audio version of the pod on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Brandon, good stuff as always, man. Enjoy your remaining week of Orlando Magic coverage, and we'll check in next Wednesday.
Sounds good. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving.